Roger, go for deploy.
Hey, welcome back, listeners.
Hey.
You are listening to Adventure Fit Radio.
Yep.
Today, what we have for you, we have a gentleman named Bill Stone. Bill Stone was when we came up with a Kickstarter campaign for our fundraising to get our setup up and running for Adventure Fit Radio. I had 3 people that I had that was in the Kickstarter campaign for people that I wanted to talk to. There was a photo of Usain Bolt, and it said underneath there, "Help us bring you the leaders in sport." There was a photo of Felix Baumgartner when he was skydiving from outer space. It said, "Help us bring you the leaders in adventure." And there was a photo of Bill Stone doing a TED Talk, and it said, "Help us bring you the leading minds of the world," or something like that. Bill Stone was one of the guys that I wanted to get on most out of anyone in the world because I watched a TED Talk that was about 8 years old now about Bill going to the moon and setting up a station where we can mine the moon for resources so that when we're trying to explore space, that we could stop there and basically use it as a fueling station.
Yeah, it's like a petrol station.
It's like a petrol station because the hardest thing about space travel is getting out of orbit. So if you can get out of orbit and then have a petrol station, you can do a lot more, expand your horizons massively, and it's a huge. And private companies are doing this. So
SpaceX.
SpaceX. I don't think SpaceX are planning to do this.
Well,
but
not that specifically, but they're looking at.
There's private companies making money in space. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So they're couriering things to the International Space Station. Bill's talking about setting up mining on the moon, and it was a fascinating interview. So Bill's one of the world's leaders in diving, so underground diving. So he's done some of the deepest dives in the world. He explored some of the deepest caverns on the planet. He also has Stone Aerospace and Shackleton Mining, which are his 2 companies. Stone Aerospace, he wants to go and drill through the moon of Europa and get to the bottom where you can go to the
ocean surface,
the oceans, to see if there's life on Europa. He's very well advanced in his plans for that. He's very well advanced in his plans for Shackleton Mining to mine the moon. And it was just a fascinating interview. Real interesting shit. This guy is one of the guys that's all these guys like Elon Musk, Bill Stone, Jeff Bezos. They're at the front line of pushing humanity forward. You know, we don't need. People always talk about we don't need to go to Mars. We don't need to go mine Europa. We don't need to do this. We don't need to do that. But so many of the biggest breakthroughs scientifically came from these exploits that we would do in the past. So the moon missions, everybody says that it was we spent so much money on the moon missions. We spent so much money on the moon missions, but there's a stat, and I don't have the exact stat, but it's something like it was a 1-to-7 ratio in dollars spent to dollars brought in. So the economy that the actual Apollo missions and the scientific breakthroughs and industries that came from that. It was $1 spent, you would get $7 back. And also, there was so many benefits in medical science in general. I'm not smart enough to go through the whole thing, but Bill Stone is on the forefront of making that happen again.
Yep, for sure.
So, but guys, we are sponsored today, before the show starts, by Carve. Carve, guys, are a VA company, so virtual assistants, so assistants that are abroad. Doesn't mean virtual, doesn't mean a computer. It means a person that works in the Philippines, and you can work with them at a really effective rate. If you guys want to test them out, I have 3 assistants with Carve, full-time, 40 hours a week. If you want to check out Carve and get 10 hours free on any project or any VA service, then you can go to www.carve.ph/ADVF. We are also brought to you by True Pride. True Pride are a wealth creation service who work with ambitious individuals and families looking to worry less, take control, and get ahead. Head to www.truepride.com.au/ADVF. Book a call via the website. You'll get your $297 joining fee if you go ahead with it. And suss it out, guys. Here's the plan with True Pride. What they average is $150 saving a week, and the program costs you $97 a month. So it's $600 a month for the cost of $97. So check it out for yourself. Also, head to www.adventurefittravel.com and check out our trips. We've got Mexico coming up with Jared Fleming. We've got Bali with Carl Paoli. We've got Kokoda Track coming up. We're about to release a bunch more trips for next year. Use the code RADIO for a 10% discount there. And
here's the show.
Here's the show. Alrighty, guys, welcome back to Adventure Fit Radio. We are here today with Bill Stone. Tommy is beside me, as usual, with his guitar.
And I'm beside myself.
To welcome Bill to the show. Bill, before we throw over to you, we're going to just quickly play you a tribute we like to refer to as Tommy's Tribute.
Excellent. Alrighty, Mr. It's William Stone, isn't it?
Bill
Stone. Okay, Stoney?
Yeah.
Oh, I'll call you Stoney. All right, mate. This is Under the Milky Way tonight with Stoney. I just got to move your hand there, mate. There we go. All righty. And... sometimes when the world gets kind of empty, sound of a deep cave with no light. I think about what Bill Stone's really up to. Then I remember he's on the show. Lower yourself down into earth. Lower yourself down all the way. I can't wait to hear about all the cool shit you've been up to. Bill Stone, let's get the interview underway. Now I've got a little bit of a solo here. There you go, mate.
Very nice.
Thank you.
Bill, welcome to the show.
All right, thank you for having me.
Cool. So we got lots to talk about. I actually, before we start, believe it or not, we've had this podcast running for 6 months now, and when we started the podcast, we had a Kickstarter campaign, and the Kickstarter campaign, we threw it out to some people. We wanted to raise money to get some of our recording equipment, to get production costs underway. And when we had the campaign, in the body of the campaign, we had a section of why you should support us and who we wish to speak to. And there was 3 pictures of people that we wanted to speak to. I built the Kickstarter campaign. This was Usain Bolt. Under the Usain Bolt, it said, help us talk to the world's leading athletes. There was... I've forgotten the second one. And the third one was you, Bill. It was Bill Stone, help us talk to the world's leading thinkers. So it's actually a real honour to have you on the show. I discovered your TED Talk, which I didn't realise was 10 years ago now, about mining the moon. And it was amazing. It was really interesting to me and inspirational. So that's I just wanted to throw that out there and say welcome to the show. All right. Yeah. So why don't you tell us about yourself, Bill? Tell us about what you do, your cave exploring background, and what you're trying to do now.
Well, I live a fairly complicated life in which I spend about 8 or 9 months of the year either writing proposals or designing robotic systems and testing them somewhere, and then the other 3 to 4 months were either out in the field doing that kind of work. This is mainly NASA-sponsored work for outer planet exploration. And then in between all that, depending on what the time schedules are, we try to keep a couple of exploration projects going down in southern Mexico and elsewhere around the world. Right now, we are in gear-up stage. We're leaving February 5th for 3.5 months at Cueva Cheve in southern Mexico. And the goal there, if we're totally lucky, is to get approximately 2,600 meters deep and about 20 to 30 kilometers from the nearest entrance of Cueva Cheve.
Whoa.
So,
That is cool.
That's kind of filling our time right now.
That's amazing. So what got you into caving? How did you end up down in these caves, 2,000 meters under the earth, and
2,000 years ago?
Yeah, well, it goes way back to when I was 14 in high school. I was a total nerd. I spent most of my time studying and doing laboratory related work. I could have been a chemist for the rest of my life. But there was an announcement that came out in the fall of that year for a club called Spelunking Club, and I had never heard the name, and so I got my mother to drive me over to the first meeting, and there were maybe 30 or 40 people there wondering what that word meant also. And they had two people from the local Pittsburgh chapter of the National Speleological Society there to give a slideshow. And, at first it was interesting. And then they showed a picture of a person on rope rappelling into what was obviously a very deep hole in the ground with total blackness below him and sunshine hitting him and the rope disappearing into nothing. And it was like, wow, that looks pretty cool. And within 6 days of seeing that show, they had us all out at a local quarry teaching us how to rappel. And that was, as you might say, the beginning of the downhill slide. Within 3 years, we were organizing our own expeditions to Mexico, northern Mexico in those days. And since then, I've spent roughly 3 months a year in the field.
That's amazing. Have you ever done any caving down at Waitomo in New Zealand?
No, but I have done caving on the South Island. We just did Harwood's Hole.
Okay.
In December, just a couple, 7 months ago, 8 months ago.
Yeah, we actually the mother company of this podcast is my company is an adventure travel company, and we actually did some caving in New Zealand a couple of years ago in Waitomo Caves, and it was so amazing. It was there was whitewater rafting and glowworms and through chasms and down waterfalls and up waterfalls, and yeah, it was really cool.
Well, that's a good exposure, and if you like that, there are people in both Tasmania and New Zealand who have some fairly serious projects going on.
Right.
There's 2 caves over 1 kilometer deep on the South Island right now.
Right. Cool. That's so. What's the whole when you're doing this cave exploration? What's the goal? Is it for exploration itself, or are you trying to do some sort of scientific studies? Explain to us how it's funded, kind of, and what the main aim of these cave expeditions are. Well,
that has changed over the years for me. When I first got into it, it was more like, how deep can I go? How fast can I go on rope? It was more of a competitive type thing. And always there's been curiosity. But what you find is that people who get into these sports, particularly caving, is that either you are into it because of the attraction of the exploration, that is the pursuit of your curiosity, and also because of the people that you work with. It's the camaraderie of working with increasingly more talented teams in increasingly more remote places that draws you back. There's a problem that if you fixate on records, a couple of things will happen. First of all is that people don't always set records. In the caving world, there are a half a dozen different types of obstacles that at any given time could stop a cave cold. And regardless of having all the technology in the world, you're not going to go any further. A good example of that was 3 years ago, we spent 3 months at a place called J2 in the north end of the Cheve system. And we had the best gear in the world. We had the best cavers from 15 countries. And we succeeded in passing 2 underwater tunnels. One was 200 meters long, the other one 650. Surfaced into going air-filled passage was what we had been hoping for. Everybody was geared up to go at that point, and the guys called up on the phone back at Camp 4 and said, I'm sorry to report this, but the thing narrows down into a 4-centimeter wide crack, and the river goes into that crack.
Oh, whoa!
And so that was it. So that's one. So if you fixate on purely a record, you're going to eventually be disappointed. And the second one is more of a safety issue. If you fixate on a record, you tend to forget about the little signals that are all around you. And I won't hesitate to say that the kind of things that we do are dangerous. 23 of my friends are dead, whom I've gone on expeditions with, whom I've sat around and drank beer with. And it's not because this is like Point Break or something. Okay, nobody's into this for an adrenaline rush, but a lot of these people who aren't here anymore, they fixated on either getting a job done, like, say, for example, being behind a camera and shooting a scene without paying attention to life support equipment, or focusing on getting to a certain depth underwater and running into physiological problems that nobody anticipated before that time. Things like that. A lot of these people died pushing the ultimate, frontier where we just didn't have any knowledge of what was going on before him. But the main thing is, why do you go? You go because of the curiosity of putting together a puzzle. If I was to look at like the places I've spent most of my time, the Huatla system, just north of the Santo Domingo River in Oaxaca, and the Cheve system, which is just south of that same gorge, it's been about piecing together a three-dimensional puzzle underground. And so when you look at it from a distance, it's like playing 3D chess, and each expedition is a move in the chess game. It's a very costly move. Okay, so we sit back just like war gamers do, and we strategize. Okay, where's the next play? Where does the expedition go? What is it going to do? How is it going to break open the next giant piece of this puzzle? And in both of these cases, it's not like we have one entrance and how far can you go into it? It's a gigantic system. Cheve, for example, stretches over 20 kilometers in length and over 8 kilometers wide.
Wow.
Huatla is very similar in terms of horizontal spread and vertical spread, but it's not as deep as Cheve. The deepest you'll get in Huatla is about 1,900 meters. In Cheve, it'll go over 2,600 meters depth when the whole thing is put together.
Right.
So we have dozens of entrances on these mountains, and the question is, how do you get to the core, to connect everything up? And in some of these cases, like J2, we were over 10 kilometers one-way travel, 4.5 days one way, just to get to the most remote camp and then go exploring. In Cheve next year, if everything goes according to plan, we're going to bust all those distances and times. We'll be looking at 30 days plus for an average push, and people will be on the order of 6 to 7 days one-way travel just to get in or out, not counting exploration time. So, the kind of people that do that are pretty rare. So we've been pulling the top people out of every country we can get people out of, from Russia to Ukraine to Abkhazia to Sweden.
It's a country I've never even heard of.
Yeah.
You're pulling people out of countries that don't even exist.
I think you're actually making these places up. Russia.
There are lots of excellent cavers in Russia and Ukraine. In fact, right now, those guys have the world depth record.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
What is the world depth record?
It's about 2,180 meters, but it's straight down in a place called Krubera.
Right.
And what are some of the conditions down there like? You just paint a picture of what it's like to go down to those sort of depths.
It depends on where you're going. Cheve happens to be at about 3,000 meters elevation, and it's subtropical. You can have snowfall in base camp in like the middle of March. And so the top part of the cave can be freezing. But the bottom part is generally up around, I would say, 10C. 9C, somewhere in that neighborhood.
That's not too bad.
So it's not so warm that you can't go diving without a dry suit. And so, we have to factor in those. But as far as survival in a place like that, generally everybody is wearing what you'd call expedition weight fleece. And that goes under some type of a shell suit that is waterproof to keep, waterfalls from chilling you out and making you hypothermic. And then everybody carries a dry set of clothes for underground camps. And so generally there's about 8 to 12 hours of travel one way between underground camps. And so the trick is keeping all those stocked, getting information up and down so everybody knows who needs what. And at the point of that spear are the cave divers who are going beyond the underwater tunnels, which are inevitably at the bottom of these places.
Yeah.
I feel like Bill, do you wake up some days and wish that you were born hundreds of years ago when there was? I feel like you were a born explorer. Obviously, most of the world has been mapped. Explored. We've covered the globe. So Is this part of the drive for you? Is part of the drive the fact that, okay, here's somewhere on Earth that nobody, I don't know how many people have been down the places that you've been, but is that part of the driving factor, is you want to be somebody that's still exploring what we can explore on Earth?
Oh, that's the drive by far. When I said satisfy your curiosity, I meant go where nobody has ever gone before, where you put your foot for the first time any human has ever seen something. And I've had the privilege of doing a lot of that. And the further you go away, the more likely it is that you might be the last person to ever see it.
Yeah, that's very true.
That's amazing.
But as far as being born at the right time, I'm doing what's available right now. If I had more money, I'd be doing bigger things like setting up bases on the South Pole of the moon. But unfortunately, that's a bigger financial gambit, and we're doing right now what we can bring sponsorship in for and afford to do. So
well, doesn't hurt to buy a lottery ticket, mate.
All right, so let's talk about some of these other bigger projects. That's the stuff. The mining's super interesting. It's kind of like your TED Talk. I mean, your TED Talk's been watched millions of times, I'm sure. Starts off talking about caving and then takes a swing and ends up talking about Europa and then the moon. So I'll let you discuss. Which are you busier on now? You're busier on working on the Europa project to mine the moon of Europa, the moon named Europa, or are we working harder on trying to build these moon bases?
So the blunt answer to that is we have to work where the money is.
Yep.
Since that TED Talk, a heck of a lot has happened in the area of outer planet robotics. We are leagues beyond what we presented at TED.
Yes,
we have built 4 or 5 different generations of vehicles beyond that, both underwater and importantly for getting through ice caps. And so today the buzzword in the space exploration world is the exploration of ocean worlds. And so it's not just Europa anymore. It's Europa, Enceladus, Titan, and then on beyond that to Ganymede and a bunch of other ones that all appear to have subsurface oceans.
Ganymede is where? Sorry.
That's one of the outer ocean moons that everybody is interested in.
Right.
But the ones that most people focus on is Europa, Enceladus, and Titan. And the latter 2 are out in Saturn, and the first one is in Jupiter orbit. So that's where we spent a lot of our time. I could bore you with techno talk, but just to give you a couple of highlights, 2 years ago we built the first laser-powered cryobot, which is it's a device that robotically melts its way through ultra-deep ice caps. And the way we power it without using a nuclear reactor is to take a large industrial laser on the surface and send power down through a glass fiber the thickness of your hair, and then use it in the robot to convert it back to electrical power and heat to melt through the ice and run computers and things like that. And with that kind of technology, we could actually send a vehicle through 40 kilometers of ice and into an ocean below. So that's one section of it. The other half is what do you do when you get through? And we just this past year spent 4 months in Antarctica with the Artemis vehicle, and you can see some of that if you go to our website, which is stoneaerospace.com. There's links in there for some of the movies that show that. And that was a 1.5 ton vehicle that had roughly a 20 kilometer range, and it was deployed down a drilled access shaft adjacent to the Ross Ice Shelf. And so we were doing missions of up to 10.5 kilometers or so with that. And the trick was that after its exploratory mission, it had to find its way back to that tiny 1.2 meter diameter hole through 10.5 meters of ice to get home. Otherwise, we lose a $10 million robot.
Wow.
And I'm happy to say that both the team and the robot came home in one piece. Some of our team were computer programmers. A lot of us were also there supporting the mission start. So we were actually doing diving below 10 meters of ocean ice in the Ross Sea to clear the vehicle for takeoff when it finally got ready to go. So all the data communication links were in place. And then when it came back, if there was any hang-ups when it was supposed to do a automated rendezvous and dock, we could send a diver down to go after it. But that was probably some of the more freaky diving I've done, where the surface has got this dull white glow between 10 meters of ice and the surface, and below you is a 500-meter black void with absolutely nothing. And
that is insane. I can't even imagine what would be going through your mind. I mean, obviously, you'd probably be pretty calm and relaxed considering where you've been in the past. But so with this, with all these tests, so Europa, Enceladus, what's the actual status? Who's leading the way? Who's funding it? Is NASA funding this? Like when are we actually realistically going to have one of these heat boring machines drilling down through the ice on one of these planets? What's the time frame?
Well, the answer on that is it depends. Okay, and I'll put it to you square. Okay, if the government goes the way it goes, which is very methodical and very risk averse, in 2020 or 2022, they're going to launch a flyby. This is NASA now. They're going to launch a flyby mission that will have, very importantly, an ice-penetrating radar on it that will look at Europa from all sides. And the reason we need that is to know how thick the ice is. Nobody at this point can tell you what it is. They've guessed based on modeling, but it's purely conjecture. So this thing will provide planet-wide maps of how thick the ice is, how stable it is, where might be the safest place to put a lander. It so happens that there is interest in the U.S. Congress to advance this idea of discovery of life off Earth. And so there is a push either for 2022, more likely 24, 25, or 26, to launch a lightweight lander and get down on the surface. Now, the problem is if you read into this in depth, you'll discover that being on Europa is not a very great place to be if you happen to be alive. And the reason is that the radiation environment there is so intense that a human would only last about 5 minutes.
All right.
And a set of electronics, perhaps an hour.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
So they're looking at a maximum survival, even with shielding for their electronics, of maybe 30 hours to sit at the surface. So here's the other big kicker: is to get out there. Even using the largest rocket that's ever been built, and it doesn't exist right now. There's a lot of government money being dumped into what's called the SLS launch system to be able to put approximately 120 metric tons into Earth orbit. That amount of payload there, along with all the fuel that you have to run the mission out to Europa, will put 35 kilograms of science payload on the surface. So that's like the weight of probably your standard backpacker's pack.
That's
which
crazy.
Ain't much, which is not much. Okay, so we've been working the question of how lightweight can we build a system that could actually get through the ice cap. And over the past year, we've made some incredible breakthroughs that I unfortunately can't talk about in public yet. But to make a long story short, we have designed nuclear power systems that will fit in the side of a cryobot that is capable of getting all the way through to the European Ocean and all the way to the bottom.
Wow.
So how far does it have to go down to get to the ocean, sorry?
So depending on who you're talking to, the thickness may be anywhere from 1 kilometer to as much as 20 kilometers.
Okay.
Right.
That's the ice. And the ocean could be anywhere from 30 kilometers to as much as 100 kilometers.
Sure.
Okay. Now, before you panic, if you know something about building underwater equipment on Earth, there is a benefact to all this, in that Europa is small. It's about the size of the Earth's moon. And so the gravity on Europa is only 1/6 G, which means that at 100 kilometers depth underwater, you're effectively at 16 kilometers on Earth. And so you're a little bit more than the depth of the Challenger Deep out there in the South Pacific.
Yep.
And so that's something we know how to design equipment to work in. It's still pretty doggone deep, but it's something that we know how to do. So if you ask me, when would they do this mission and how much would it cost to do it through the government, it would be at best that particular mission, just getting the cryobot through the ice cap into the bottom of the ocean. I'm going to guess somewhere between 2035 and 2040.
Okay.
And to put it, hold on to those numbers, because I'm going to tell you some different ones. And if you were talking about putting a cryobot down with a long-range nuclear-powered deployable autonomous underwater vehicle, now you're looking at probably 2050 and beyond.
This is no good.
Well, the reason is partially because of this idea of risk reduction and the fact that there are procedures that have to be followed, and they end up just simply taking stacks of time to get through them. Now, that's the government way.
Yes,
and
come on. I know where you're leading us. Bill. I want to hear. Come on. What other ways do we have?
It will cost somewhere between $5 and $7 billion just for the cryobot mission,
right?
If they do it with the nuclear power system. So that's.
Let me just go and get my wallet. I'll.
Right. Well, so that is exactly the option. Okay. Yeah. Right now, there are over 1,500 billionaires in the world. And if any of you are out there listening, let me give you a piece of information, okay? If we want to find life off this planet in our lifetime, we have a team that can do it. It's going to run probably around $1.5 billion, okay? And that's largely the cost of the launch vehicle and the development of the payloading and certifications for launch of nuclear material. All of these things are capable of being done by private corporations, okay? I would have been laughed out of the podium if I had said this 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact is that the technology has come along since then to the point where a private team using subcontractors, some of them might be the same as the government uses, and we might even use certain government labs to do that. We could do the whole thing for about $1.5 billion and do it in under 7 years. That is to say, have a cryobot in the European Ocean within 7 years.
It's actually quite
the difference
feasible,
is,
isn't it?
I really wish I had have studied harder in school.
Yeah.
Because because $1.5 billion to me, I mean, $1 billion is $1 billion.
Yeah.
But it's not an inordinate amount of money.
No, it's not.
So do you think this is a really interesting point, Bill. Do you think this is the future of exploration, like space exploration in particular, with the likes of Bas Lansdorp and Elon Musk, people like yourself,
Richard Branson,
who are trying to open up space to private companies because, like you say, the government is so hamstrung by rules, regulations, and funding? Do you think this is the future? The future is people like yourself.
If people like myself can connect with the people who are in the higher strata of economic wealth.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, what we're talking about is not when I originally said there that I could go on caving expeditions and do original work here. It's because that's something that we know how to raise the money for. I can pull in $1 million or $1.5 million pretty much within the space of a year if I have to.
Yep.
Okay, for a robotic test mission out to Antarctica, we can pull in $5 million for a course of a 3-year project. Okay, these are small potatoes because you still have to pay this launch cost to get to orbit, from which you can then do the injection burns to get you into the translation trajectories out to these other targets. Okay, so this is an interesting transition zone. Okay, I probably more so than anybody else in the space business, I've had the privilege of being on the side where I've seen human exploration at the absolute limits of remoteness and dependency on other people in places where you don't have a mission control telling you what you have to do every second and where they're not going to rescue you. You know, so in that sense, you mentioned 500 years ago. Yeah, we're kind of like with those guys, where there isn't going to be somebody to come rescue Magellan. If you don't get back with your 5 ships, too bad.
Yeah.
Not that we're looking to do that for an adrenaline rush, but that's the risk you have to accept if you're going to explore.
Yep.
On the other hand, I've had the privilege of being right at the cutting edge of robotics, thanks to funding from NASA for the past 15 years.
Awesome.
And so, I do know what the issues are with robotics, and I do know what the issue is with human life support. And so if you get into the question of what can you do in space exploration, okay, there's a couple of levels. I talked about these in the initial stages in that TED conversation. And that is, there are people who are trying to address this question of how do you get from Earth to orbit? Okay, that's a big question.
Yep.
They're going to continue to fight that. There is a way that you can balance off that equation. And then that was the argument that I presented at TED, which is if you establish a mining operation at the South Pole of the Moon and bring the raw consumable materials, basically water, frozen water, back to low Earth orbit, you've now done something amazing. And it's that you say to me, what's the big deal? You brought some water back to Earth orbit. Why not bring it down to Earth? Well, first of all, it's not worth anything down on Earth unless you have, a couple of people in Hollywood who would like to pay $50,000 a liter for the privilege of saying I'm drinking moon water.
Yeah, Mount Franklin would be going out of business.
Yeah, it would, wouldn't it?
You could probably do that once or twice, but then it would lose its value.
Yeah.
Mount Moon.
So, but if it's in orbit, okay, and if you listen to the TED argument, here's the thing in a nutshell. You're going to tip the equation by a factor of anywhere from 20 to 25. Since TED, we've actually rerun a lot of those calculations in much finer numerical detail, and we believe that we can get the tipping point down to about 25 to 1. So what that means is if it costs you $25 to boost something from Cape Canaveral up to the space station, we could do it for $1, okay? Not even Jeff Bezos, not Elon Musk, not the guys at
You there?
Virgin Galactic. Yeah, none of those guys are going to come close to that kind of number. They might knock off the cost to orbit by a factor of 2, maybe 3, if they're super lucky. Okay, everybody was saying, well, okay, SpaceX is in business and it's going to be cheap. Well, you now start to see that it's not such a 100% guaranteed thing. Just a couple of days ago, they lost a second rocket. Okay, that's part and parcel for the trade. Okay, and there's going to be 25 or 100 or 1,000 Monday morning quarterbacks who will try to say what happened because they don't know what happened, but it's good to listen to them on the radio, right? Mm-hmm. Right. Or you're going to be at SpaceX saying, okay, why did that happen, and how much is it going to cost us to permanently resolve that problem? The same thing with airlines. Okay. But the problem is they are fighting the rocket equation, okay? And if you want to see an interesting discussion on this subject, go into Google and type in the tyranny of the rocket equation, and you'll be in for a good read. Get a cup of coffee and read that, and you'll start to understand why it is so difficult to beat that number of $10,000 a kilogram. Mm-hmm. And so
as far as I understand it, so you're talking about here reducing the cost of, you're talking about refueling in space. So you're actually taking the rocketing and the out of Earth orbit out of the equation, whereas Elon Musk is specifically focusing on reusable rocketry to try and bring that factor down. Am I on the right path here, Bill? Just to make sure I'm not getting confused.
You're peripherally there, okay? So
Gotcha.
The deal is this. Elon, as well as Jeff Bezos, as well as Virgin Galactic, okay, as well as Strato Launch and all the other people, Paul Allen, their game is to try to reduce the cost of getting to orbit. And their way of thinking about it is twofold, okay? One is mass production, the way that cars initially started with Henry Ford's production line, because the more you do, the more economy of scale you get. So if I launch a rocket every day, okay, I'm going to have a cheaper cost of operations than I will if I launch only one rocket every year.
Yes,
for sure.
Right? Just because if that rocket fails, the implications of all that are so much greater. Whereas I'm launching one every day. If I miss the flight, I put it on the next one. If that flight explodes, I put it on the next one, and everything, because they've got the operations cost down. They know exactly how to do it. The Russians, in fact, were very good at this with the Proton rocket, and the costs of actually launching from a Proton were at least 3 or 4 times cheaper than launching on U.S. and ESA rockets. But once they discovered how to be capitalists, they immediately raised their rates to the same cost as the Western rockets. And this is the problem, okay? Everybody's fighting this same thing. So you're looking at how efficient can I make it, and the other thing is, can I save any pieces of those rockets? Okay, so this idea of Elon Musk looking at trying to preserve the first stage, very clever, okay? People have thought about that. Nobody's ever tried to do it for real except for him, okay? And that's good. The other way to do it is the way Strato Launch and the way Virgin Galactic are looking at it, and so is Jeff Bezos, which is to use a recoverable first stage that flies you up and then it flies home.
Yep.
Okay, in the case of Strato Launch and Virgin Galactic, it's a winged vehicle. In the case of Bezos right now, it's a hovering vehicle. But the idea is then you bring those back and you reuse those parts, and only what goes from there on is what you're concerned about. Eventually, you could think of potentially recovering most of those pieces. Now, there's nothing to say that they're all going to come back in a usable form. So there's going to be a certain amount of loss because, if you have a damaged vehicle and they say, hey, this thing's been refurbished, buddy, you want to get on top of the rocket? I might say,
Maybe not. Maybe you do the first one.
Maybe I'd like the shiny new one. You don't know.
Yeah, for sure.
But so they're fighting those
Even
two
if
things.
the shiny new ones blow up in the air.
Yeah, that's right.
Not to mention the reusable versions.
So regardless of how good they get at that, they are still fighting this problem of the cost in terms of the percentage of the payload to get you to orbit is mostly fuel. Okay?
Yes.
To put a tiny amount of payload into orbit, it's mostly fuel. So here's where the equation flips on its head. What we were proposing at TED is if you bring the fuel back from the moon, you bring it back in the form of frozen water, and I could spend an hour or two telling you why, but you bring it back in the form of frozen water, you convert it into liquid hydrogen or liquid oxygen. There's multiple steps involved in there. Okay, and now you're capable of either A, refueling spacecraft that permanently reside in Earth orbit and take you to where you want to go. Think of it as a taxi.
Yep.
Or the stuff that you send up from down below only has dry weight, okay, and it's ready to be refueled.
Yes.
So if you do that, all of that fuel that you left off, guess what? That suddenly becomes payload.
Yes.
And if you work out the mechanics, if we are successful in establishing these gas stations in orbit, fuel depots, if you will, but not terrestrially supplied from the moon,
Sure.
you suddenly get effectively a 20-to-1 increase in the amount of useful payload that these guys can bring up. So it's a helping hand, if you will. Now, if you talk to any of these entrepreneurs, nobody wants to even talk about this yet because they're too wrapped around the axle of trying to get their own problem solved. Okay, as you can see, SpaceX doesn't have it 100%. So they're all focused. They're not going to be thinking about going to the moon. And so, again, it's down to one of these deals where, if there's a couple of billionaires that want to get together and put this next piece together, well, guess what? I've got the team and the plan to do it. We have a 500-page business plan. We are ready to go. And it's just a matter of trying to get there. Now, this is an even higher.
Wow.
I'd love to read that business plan.
Oh, so would I.
I have about 30 cents in my bank account, so don't get your hopes up, Bill. I'm not going to be able to invest, but I reckon I'd read every page of that business plan.
There's $1 under this couch that I found before.
Yeah. Ironically, the number to kick it off, to make it sustainable and continuing, that is making money, is not too different from what we calculated back for the TED conference in 2007. And the reason for that has been the reduced cost in launches, the efficiency gain that has come from the reduction of weight in composite materials and things like that. And so even though prices have generally gone up, the actual amount that you can put up for that price is comparable. So right now, the way we have been looking at it, and I'll just give you 15 seconds of business concepts here, is that it takes about $1.5 to $2 billion to initiate the first phase. Beyond that, everything pretty much goes IPO and conventional debt financing through large banks.
Right.
So these are standard corporate vehicles. But the initial amount to trigger what I would refer to as the avalanche, it's an effect that I see all the time with sponsoring expeditions, and that is you start with an idea, and the idea has to be good, right? It has to be a cogent, powerful idea. So we start, for example, and say, you know what, we're going to put an international team together, and we're going to go to Cueva Cheve in 2017, and if we're successful here, it's going to be the world's deepest cave. It'll be the equivalent of the highest mountain on Earth being discovered in 2017.
Awesome.
So what happens then is you start going down a list of what you have, what you need, and then you prioritize what the most expensive thing is that you need. And it's not always cash. Frequently, it can be something like a piece of equipment. Okay, it could be a methanol air fuel cell that we would use to generate power beyond underwater tunnels. Things like that. And that's not just a making a case. That's an actual fact that we're looking at right now. If you get that most expensive sponsor on board, it could also be prestigious, the Explorers Club, National Geographic, Discovery Channel, on down the line, Rolex, okay? And we've had all of them as primary sponsors. Once you get that anchor tenant sponsor and people start to realize that this is going to go, there's an exponential curve of the number of sponsors on the bus versus the time left until the expedition leaves.
Yeah.
So everybody is trying to jump on by the time you're a week away, right?
Yeah.
And, it's getting those first ones so that you have the thing ready. But the point is, once that anchor tenant goes, it's an avalanche. The whole thing is triggered, and it's going to happen. And so then you can
let me ask. Sorry to cut you off, Bill. Let me ask. With getting these real foundation sponsors on, getting the big fish so that all the little fish will follow, or however you want to phrase it. How important is the actual ability to tell a story? So for yourself, you're a well-spoken man. Your TED Talk is great, but like the ability to convey a larger picture of we're trying to go to Europa because we want to further humanity. We want to find life on another planet, or the space. The Apollo missions ended years and years ago. We want to reinvigorate working on the moon. Like, you've got to frame it in a way that will get people passionate, right?
Yeah, but you also don't want to use hyperbole.
Right.
Okay, that's the one thing. And this is where some people step over the line, okay? And I won't name any names here, but I will tell you that anybody who thinks they're going to Mars in the next 30 years is using hyperbole, okay? There is no way to support that yet.
That's really upsetting.
Yeah,
there's a couple of numbers. Well, you can do it if you do it the way we talked about here. Is you get a bunch of billionaires together and they say, let's just do it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, one of two things is going to happen. Either they're going to do, the idea of the transit by Mars, the fly by Mars. Send two people up and have them go by, wave at Mars, and back they come. 3 years later. To which I say, ho hum.
Mm-hmm.
What have you done? Have you done any exploration?
Yeah.
Exploration to me, this is where this gets into the this gets into the holy words, of exploration. To me, exploration is putting your foot in places where nobody has ever gone before. Absolutely. That means a surface related phenomena. It means landing on the planet and being there and picking up the sand. I don't know if you've ever seen that movie Apollo 13, but there's a great scene in there where they've realized that they're not going to be able to land and they're flying around the moon and they come back and they're looking out the window and the one guy says, "Look at that," and meanwhile back there, Jim Lovell is having this flashback, thinking that he should be down there, kneeling down and picking up a handful of dirt and looking at it, with his own two eyes. I can't even begin to tell you how powerful that is.
Well, that's what I was about to say. Is I couldn't think of anything worse than doing a flyby of Mars.
Oh, exactly.
We're having it in your line of sight and knowing
and not being able to step foot on it.
Yeah,
yep.
Right. It's more for some. It's more frustrating than anything else.
Oh, absolutely.
So there is one thing that could be pulled off. Okay, so let's we're talking far out now. Okay, if a bunch of people were willing to put the kind of money up, okay. You could do a one-way mission to Mars. Now, this has been talked about for 25 years. Every couple of years, it comes up at a conference and somebody says, who would go on a one-way mission to Mars? And more people start to raise their hands, okay? So why would you do that? There's only one single reason, okay? And that is to prove that humanity can survive for a while on another planet and to be sending back weekly telecasts saying, I'm on Mars. Why don't you guys come join me? Okay. Now, from a sustainability standpoint, it's a dead end. Okay. And quite frankly, those people will die on Mars without ever seeing other humans. Okay. I'm being totally blunt here. I've been exploring for 56 years. I know what it's about. And to do that, they aren't going to see resupply in our lifetime.
Alrighty, guys. Before we go any further, we're just going to quickly make mention of our sponsors. So, True Pride, guys. True Pride are a wealth creation service. Basically, we're working with me and Tommy, and we're trying to crunch down on our budget so we can see where we're spending too much money, see where we can rein things in, and the idea is that we'll save $150 a week, and that'll it's at the cost of $97. So, basically, I, during the week, made with the guys' help, I went and negotiated a new deal with my phone where I got $400. I got a new phone. I got the $400 early exit fee waived, and I also negotiated them down to get a way better plan that'll save me. My average phone bills were $180 a month because I didn't have enough data. I negotiated with the guys using a script that Craig gave me, which got it down to $120, and I'll definitely never go over, so I'll save myself $60 a month there alone. And got myself a new phone. Little things that you don't think about. Craig's got 1 million of them, the guys at True Pride, to help you get ahead. So, if you want to check them out, Tommy, what do they do?
Well, I just want to add on something as well. Some of those little things as well can be as simple as writing a goal saying you won't get a parking ticket for 6 months. And you may be asking, why do I need to pay for a service that'll when I can just figure that out on my own? But you don't. The service keeps you accountable. It hooks you up with some software called CashFit, which allows you to have a look and really have a look at your budget and have a look at all the different areas that you spend. Gives you goals, it gives you plans, it gives you ways to go about all those things, and it's absolutely fantastic. So just in my second week, I've already managed to save over $65, and it's going up. It's fantastic.
So www.truepride.com.au/ADVF, book a call, and if you decide to go ahead, you get $297 joining fee waived. We're also brought to you by Carve. Carve guys are where I get my assistants in the Philippines. So they're a company that house 100 or so assistants under the one roof. They have specialists in all the things that you need. They have all the programs that you need. You pay these guys $6 US or $8 Australian per hour for their services. I have 2 assistants for Adventure Fit Travel and 1 assistant, me and Tommy, have for Adventure Fit Radio, and just taking care of all the stuff that we don't need to take care of. And it means you can upscale your business. You can do a lot more for a lot less, or you can just simply use it to pay the money to get the stuff that you don't want to do done, and then you can get so much more time back in your life. It's legitimately a game changer. If you want a better quality of life for yourself, or you want to upscale your business and grow faster, you definitely should check out Carve. Head to www.carve.ph/ADVF and you'll get 10 free hours on any project you choose. Here's the show again. What about the scientific breakthroughs, though, Bill? Surely they're worth. Surely that they're going to have the ability to do a lot of really important research on why Mars is the way that it is, and if it was like Earth.
I would discount the drama of the level of scientific breakthrough that would result.
Right.
Okay. We've had a lot of systems on the ground right now, very sophisticated. None of them has yet come up with evidence of extant microbes. None of them. Okay. So Mars is a pretty harsh place, right? It is coated with oxidizing materials that are poisonous to humans. What most people don't understand, if you watch the movie, what was it just last fall?
The Martian.
The Martian, right? Excuse me for the memory fault there. We were like out in the middle of nowhere in Antarctica for 4 months, and we didn't see the movie until it came on.
Yeah,
anyways,
fair enough.
That movie, unfortunately, is a complete crock of hogwash.
Right.
Okay. Why? Because the radiation environment on the surface of Mars is eventually lethal after a couple of months.
Yeah.
Okay. The galactic cosmic radiation background that is hitting Mars, particularly the higher order ion complexes. Okay. These would be things from nuclear fusion explosions from stars skidding across, the universe and the galaxy and then running into you, at sublight speed and causing ionizing damage, okay, is serious. It's more serious than anybody recognized.
Right.
There's the human support community is just starting now to get their hands around this. To give you an idea, a survivable human mission package going to Mars will have to have between a 5 to 10 meter thickness of water around that human crew at all times.
Right.
To protect them from mainly galactic cosmic radiation, but also from solar flares. Okay, the environment on the surface of Mars is about 40% of straight-on galactic cosmic radiation because the atmosphere is so thin. So that habitat that you saw with the the plastic sheeting and duct tape, forget it.
It's not going to do the job.
4 months, he's dead. That's all there is to it. So
you mean 150 souls?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So
come on, Bill. I don't want to have to be running the show here, mate.
So ironically, the only way you're going to survive on Mars is if you look into something in the form of lava tubes on the side of Olympus Mons and other similar volcanoes like it, of which there are images from orbit that are incontrovertible. There are lava tubes on Mars. So if you want to avoid the GCR, you got to go underground. How interesting is that? Going back to caveman life.
Living the molish life.
Right. So that's it. But the other thing on all this that we didn't get back to here is that to field that mission to Mars, you're looking at roughly 700 metric tons in low Earth orbit. Do you remember that number I mentioned a little while back, that the Space Launch System? And this is at the best of all best hope of the engineers that it'll reach, okay, maybe within 10 or 15 years, would be 120 metric tons to low Earth orbit. Okay, guess what? You'd need 6 of those to build that thing and assemble it together, which means you would have to assemble it somewhere on orbit. So that is pushing things in the direction they have to go. A lot of people are wondering what they're going to do with the International Space Station in 5 or 10 years. The answer is you convert it into a staging dock where you do industrial assembly of longer range rockets in orbit. Cool. That is a perfect use for the International Space Station. Probably should be turned over to a private consortium to run it.
Yeah. So, why does the International Space Station? What's the problem with the International Space Station remaining the International Space Station? I'm unaware.
Well, it costs money to keep things up there, and there's this question of where's the cost benefit ratio.
Right.
Most people will say, well, why do we go to space? Well, the initial answer is because we want to know what the heck is out there, and the space programs of the various governments of the world, whether it's NASA, ESA, Roscosmos, all of those people are out there doing that because there is an interest in the science and the exploration. Unfortunately, human exploration has fallen behind largely because of this problem with the rocket equation, right? And until we crack that, humans aren't going too far, or they're only going to go very rarely, and their likelihood of survival is low. So the bottom line is the only way to get past all this is to do what I talked about in TED, which is to go and establish resource extraction systems at the South Pole or the North Pole of the Moon, bring it back to Earth orbit, use the ISS as a dry dock in orbit to build the stuff that you want to send out elsewhere. That is a sustainable system. It actually will make money for the private companies that put that stuff into place. What is the benefit of that? The benefit is it starts to radically reduce the cost of doing anything in space by a factor of 20 to 25 to 1. Okay, not 20 to 25%, but 20 to 25 to 1.
Yep.
Right? So that's where the first big change comes from. And then eventually, basically, if I were king, I'd be putting a lot of money into novel methods for propulsion dynamics to try to figure out ways that we can get off a deep gravity well like Earth and into Earth orbit without using rockets. So that's an area for physics research.
Right.
Hey, Bill, I want to come back to Europa and moon mining in that sense. Let's just say that we can get all these people together, all these billionaires, and fund it and get the drills up there and all that sort of stuff, which I'd be so amazed, and obviously yourself would love to see. What do you expect to find on Europa?
So that's a darn good question. There has been spectacular advances in what we've been seeing lately from various spacecraft, Galileo and others, as to the fact that a lot of these moons are dynamic. So, for example, if you look up Enceladus, you'll find out that there are actually geysers, vents of water from deep within in the subsurface of the planet are being pulsed out, just like geysers in Yellowstone National Park and elsewhere around the world. And they're blowing off material that suggests that there may be hydrocarbons present. Now, what they have not seen in any of that is anything that would be conclusively indicative of life. So, when you talk to the astrobiology community, you're gonna hear 2 words. Okay, one is biomarkers. Okay, and the other one is extant life.
Sure.
Okay, so the first one says, well, living organisms produce metabolites. Okay, you and I and everybody else on the planet eats food and they put waste out. Okay,
yes,
and those things are represented by changes in the molecular chemistry of the material.
Yep.
So, for example, if we had microbes in the surface ice of Europa that were consuming something for energy, they would be producing something on the side. What would that be? It might be methane. Okay. Could be something else. There are, for example, sulfur-eating bacteria on Earth. We've seen them in hydrothermal springs. So that kind of stuff can go on. But we call those things biomarkers. When we talk about extant life detection, that's the gold ring. Okay, that's what everybody would love to see.
Sure.
And so the answer is like this. Just imagine you're on the surface of Europa. Okay, and you got to get out of there fast because the radiation environment is so incredibly intense that you aren't going to last long. So You harden the lander that's going to be there because it still has to have communications back to Earth to let you know what's going on. And then you send this ice-penetrating robot, this cryobot, down through the ice. We have done calculations right now on how to build a 100-kilowatt fission-based thermal reactor that'll fit within a 30-centimeter diameter cryobot. That's actually a pretty small diameter system.
Wow.
That is a launchable system, okay? And that could actually get through the European ice cap. How long will it take to get through? Right now, at 100 kilowatts for a 30-centimeter probe, we're looking at probably a speed of on the order of a couple hundred meters a day at most, because the European ice is pretty cold. It's at 100 Kelvin. So if you type that into an online converter, you'll see that in centigrade, it's pretty darn cold. It's cold enough that you're almost at liquid nitrogen temperatures.
Wow.
And it's also in vacuum, so you got to get through that and into that. And as you go down, eventually it's going to start to warm up, because if there is an ocean, and we know there is, we could go into a big discussion on that.
Sure.
It'll be about 0 degrees C when you break through.
Okay.
Right.
Maybe
It's
minus
not ridiculously cold.
No, maybe minus 1, 2, or 3 degrees C.
Right.
Because of salt being in the water. And there is evidence that there's likely to be salt ions in the water. They've seen this in the plumes and Enceladus. So the case for a salty ocean is pretty good.
Okay.
The only question is how deep it is, how deep the ice is to get to it, and then when you get through. So what we have been looking at, and this is a project that NASA funded called Spindle, it actually looks at a controlled depth system where you're melting down with a nuclear reactor, and the vehicle is paying out both the communication and a strength element behind it. So it's going to have upwards of 100 kilometers worth of this stuff on board. And when it breaks through into the ocean, what we do is we drop that vehicle slowly down through the ocean, measuring what the environment is like. How strong are the ocean currents? What way do they flow? How do they vary with time? Same thing for temperature, same thing for density, salinity, things that would ultimately affect the design of vehicles that you would want to put into that environment. And then you reel it all the way down to the silicate core of the moon. Okay,
Wow.
So then when we do that, not only have we found out how thick the ice is, we've also found out how deep the ocean is, and whether it's some raging tidal thing, where you've got, 20-knot waves, pulsing around the planet, or whether it's a nice static, calm lagoon, where there's microbes hanging around every thermal vent on the bottom. And the general consensus is that because there's an ocean at all, it is occurring because the moon is being ripped and pulled by the Jovian gravity field. It's got a highly eccentric orbit, so you can just imagine squeezing a tennis ball, every second, okay? And eventually, if you do that enough, you'll notice that the tennis ball is starting to get warm.
Yes.
Right? So what happens then is there's tidal flexing in the silicate core, cracks form, heat comes out those silicate cracks, and you start getting things like what we have on the mid-Atlantic and the mid-ocean Pacific ridges, called black smokers, thermal vents, things like that. And guess what? Microbes like to be around that kind of energy. And if you have microbes, well, guess what? Higher forms of life are going to prey on those microbes. Mm-hmm. So the only question is, was Europa around long enough with the right constituents in the rock and in the water and the right amount of heat coming out to allow life to independently develop there?
Wow. And what do we think?
So that's the game. Now, if you drop a cryobot through and go all the way to the floor, unfortunately, you're on this string. You can go up and down the string as many times as you want, to find out how these tides change with time over the course of years, right? But that's as far as you can go. You got a single point that you can look through there. If you really want to find out what's going on, you got to go back with a bigger cryobot and deploy a nuclear-powered autonomous underwater vehicle. And we have built prototypes for each of these systems. We're further along on this planet than anybody in terms of research labs building this kind of gear.
So you're ready to go.
We are. And I don't say that with hubris. Mm-hmm. We've got a lot of very good people working with us. It's a matter of assembly of the right teams, but the basic points have been proved. Somebody could say, well, you haven't actually built the reactor. I'll say, the people we work with have designed a lot of space reactors. So there's nothing in this in the way of physics that will stop this mission.
Right.
Is it going to be complex? Hell yeah. It'll be probably the most complex intellectual undertaking, since the Manhattan Project or the Apollo Project or something similar to that, the Human Genome Project. So to do that, is it going to be risky? Heck yeah, it could bust at any point along the way. But if you don't try,
That's right.
then
It's
where's
just so
the human
important.
where's the human spirit in that? So here's the kicker, guys. So let's suppose you do that, right? We go down there and we put that nuclear powered AUV down there. The first thing you do is you drop to the floor and you begin radially mapping out the core of that moon, right? Whether it's Europa or Enceladus, I don't care, right? But Europa has got everybody's interest right now, and it certainly has an ocean, and it probably has the highest probability for life right now.
Right.
There's going to be other tribes. The Enceladus tribe will argue vehemently that you should go to Enceladus, and the Titan crowd is going to argue that you should go to Titan. But they're all good people, okay? And I know lots of them. So. And then they're all my friends.
Mate. You can say what you want.
they're all my friends, and they all just happen to be in different tribes. It's like being in different fraternities,
Yeah, that's right.
And so you do that, right? And so on that vehicle, on that mobile system that's going out and it's mapping and it's looking, it's sniffing, and it finds something. It goes through all these various stages. We call it a hierarchical detection process. Okay, so the first thing you're doing is you're looking for sensor data that tells you if there's anything changing really radically. Has the temperature gone up? Did the salinity jump? Is there sulfur? Anything like that. And then you follow that. The vehicle sniffs it out like a bloodhound, and you go down there, and then you start doing things like looking at it with spectroscopes, like fluorescence spectroscopy, because guess what? Microbes that happen to be living tend to fluoresce at certain wavelengths. If you see that, you say, hey, man, there's something going on here. The next thing you do is you go in there with a 3D microscope, and you pull a sample in, and you start looking at it. Now is where things get interesting, okay? So if you're really clever, that 3D microscope can analyze and look and figure out what the shape and the size and these things of whatever is in that sample. Let's suppose you find a microbe, okay? Here's the $64,000 question. Is it Europan, or did you bring it with you on your spacecraft?
Yeah.
Right? There's a whole sub-study field called planetary protection that tries to reduce to as low as possible the amount of microbes that you carry, but it's really hard to make that number zero, right? So the tough part is in that microscope or in a molecular sequencer, if we can build them small enough to put on that vehicle, how do you know it didn't come from Earth? So the key is to look for features that don't match any Earth genome, right? And the best we're going to be able to do, I think, for right now is to try to build artificially intelligent systems that parse through that data and say, it looks like it's of this class, but I can't go any further. And then we come back and we uplink that data to the lander. It beams it back to Earth, and the scientists all gather around to look at that image or that video clip. Video is much more expensive than a single image.
Sure.
In terms of the cost of mission, just because of the power requirements and the time to send it.
So it's not quite as easy as just going down to the ocean and seeing a nice little aqua ET just swimming by and going, there we go.
Okay, so nobody that I know will in public say that that's a possibility.
Right.
Okay. But I'll put it to you this way. If we're going to have cameras on these things, and even before you got to the microscope stage, if you came in following one of these, say a sulfur scent to a hydrothermal vent, and you saw macro life, let's say,
a goldfish.
Shrimp, anything of like that, that would be.
We found Dory.
Any kind of krill would do just fine.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be anything out of a James Cameron movie. But I can tell you that if you saw something like that in an image down there, I think it would make everybody stop and pause on the world for a bit.
It definitely would. Yep.
100%.
Because that would not have come from Earth, and then you got to ask yourself a whole bunch of other questions.
Well,
about
exactly
if that's out there, then who else is out there?
Well,
and are they smart? And are they smarter than us? So now you're getting into the whole Carl Sagan, regime.
But it's just so interesting. Yeah, people would definitely be asking those questions. If that is out there and that's within our own solar system, then what's going to be on Andromeda, let alone a galaxy billions and billions and billions of light years away? There's got to be other stuff, and that's what God, if I was a billionaire, I would be right behind you, my friend.
I think it's the biggest question. For me, it's always been the biggest question.
Yeah.
I always think back of, I used to think back into ancient Egypt and think how the pyramids were being built and how societies rose and how we evolved. But at the end of the day, for me and for most people, Bill, I would assume would be thinking that, I mean, is there life out there? Are we alone? There's probably the greatest question that we have. How did we get here, and are we alone? So, I think,
and you have two choices to answer that question. You can wait for the governments to do it in 50 years, or a bunch of us can get together privately and find out in 7 years.
That's awesome.
Oh, that's so cool.
So let me just. We know you got to get out of here at some point soon, Bill. So let's drop the Enceladus bit for a tick. Say let's focus on the moon, because we need the moon's the lead domino, right? If we can get the moon mining happening, then everything else becomes a lot easier. So
that's the key.
Tell us how will that actually play out? The one question I want to know is, how would you actually get the equipment up there to start a major mining production on the surface of the moon? That, to me, that's the bit I'm like, I can't logistically figure that out.
Well, so when we gave that TED lecture, we had basic numbers, but what we did not have was a completely developed business plan. Mm-hmm. Since that time, we have developed that along with what we would call an enterprise simulator. Okay, and this is a very, very sophisticated piece of code that basically comes in and looks at how to define what the least amount of mass is that you have to put in Earth orbit to start this process. Okay.
Yep.
So let me kind of try to paint it out in a simpler fashion here. Let's suppose that you want to start a travel service from Melbourne to Sydney. Mm-hmm. Okay. You could do a couple of things. One is that you might scrape together a bunch of money from Kickstarter, and then you go out and you say, well, okay, how many people do I have to shuffle a day to make any money? And so you'd say, well, people are willing to pay this amount of money. And then you go out and you say, how much does it cost to operate a plane? Okay, so you could do a couple of things. The first is you could go and see if anybody will lease you a plane, will rent you a plane. That's one possibility. There might be somebody who would sell you an older plane.
Yep.
Right, so you could take the risk of buying an older plane, or you could try to say, you know what, I'm just going to get a smaller plane, right? And let's say you work this out to where the cost of transit for you being a pilot and taking 2 passengers in a Cessna 152 would make a business. Mm-hmm. Okay, what would you do? You'd go to Kickstarter and you'd raise the money to buy that Cessna 172, and then you'd start announcing it, right?
Yep.
And you would start taking people. Well, if everything went right, you would find that demand would start to build, and you would be making money. Okay, let's say for every trip, you made $100, and you put that in the bank. Well, what do you do with that money? Okay, if the demand is there and you're always booked, what does that tell you? It means you need another plane, right? Or a bigger plane. So the easiest way to do it is to say, my model works right now. I'm going to go and just buy another Cessna 170 or 152. And now you get another pilot, and now you have 2 flights flying at the same time, and you're taking twice as many people, and now you're getting $200 a day, right? Well, so that is called scalable industry, right? And that is the approach that we have taken. What is the least amount of stuff that has to get up there to start bringing stuff back from the moon to where you can sell it for a profit?
Gotcha.
Yep.
And I can't tell you the exact numbers because they are proprietary, okay? But it is a lot lower than you might think. Mm-hmm. And so the key is, if you were going to work out these stages, we've got it done in phases. The first phase is you have to prospect. Okay, this is a robotic operation, and we are well suited to pull this one off, right? The idea is you go down to the places where you think it is most likely to have the stuff you're looking for, which we start with water, but there's a lot of other volatiles that are really useful in space as well. And I won't bore you with the discussion on that. But
but there's more money.
So the question is, if you were a gold miner, would you go out into a place where there's a sand quarry? No, you'd go to a place where the ore was the richest that you could possibly find. So you have to do the least amount of work to get it out, right?
Mm-hmm. For sure.
So the purpose of a prospecting mission is to go and find out where is the greatest concentration of what we're looking for that's at the shallowest possible depth. And We expect all this to be within 5 to 10 meters of the surface, okay? And you'd have to go back and perhaps listen to the TED Talk, or we could get into the discussion. But in 30 seconds or less, here's how it works. Over the course of 4 billion years, asteroids and comets have been smacking into the moon. When they hit, it's a hypervelocity impact. The energy vaporizes the entire comet or the asteroid. And a lot of these things carry a lot of water with them. Mm-hmm. So suddenly you get this big cloud of water vapor that's been put into orbit around the moon. So what happens? It cools off and becomes snow, right? And it invariably, statistically, falls over every square meter of the moon. Well, if you happen to be in the equatorial regions, which is where all of the Apollo landings took place, the sun will bake it off into space and you'll never see it again, okay? But if it happens to end up down in the polar regions, where there are very deep craters where the sun never shines, excuse the pun, right? Mm-hmm. That snow will fall on the ground and it will stay there for billions of years. Mm. So think of this like marine sedimentary buildup to form rock strata that eventually becomes mountains as the marine area is pushed up. So over time, all kinds of asteroidal materials and comets are going to hit. So in between one comet that lays down some snow, you're going to have a rocky asteroid that hits and you lay down a layer of rock dust, interweaving all the way up, some a little thicker than others, right? Mm-hmm. So the idea of the prospector is to spatially in 3D sample these various craters that we believe are the hotspots and give us the real answer quantitatively. This is where it is densest. It's going to be the easiest to get. Here's the constituency of it. You just scoop it up, you bake it, you heat it, and you get the water. So that's point one. Point two is you do something, to use a NASA phrase, called risk reduction testing. And that is you take all of the pieces that you're going to put on the moon and all of the pieces that you need in Earth orbit up into Earth orbit, probably in the vicinity of the International Space Station, just because that's a safe haven where if something goes wrong, you can abort your mission and go over there and hopefully hitch a ride home.
Yep.
Right? So the idea is to put all the pieces up there. Then what you start doing is where things get very interesting. We bring up fuel in the form of water. We demonstrate that you can crack that water in orbit to form rocket fuel an empty vehicle that we have that can land on the moon and start cycling pieces up there. Okay? The first things that you send up are purely robotic, and we seed lunar orbit with a couple of micro relay sats, okay, so that we can have, gigabit per second Ethernet links from Earth to the bottoms of these craters. The reason for that is then we can teleoperate these robotic systems to do the initial mining, bring it over, and process that material so that by the time you're ready to send humans up there, you've got a lot of your life support already in place, already landed. So why do you need humans? You need humans because robots break.
Yeah.
Okay? And I can say this with authority because I've been building robots for over 26 years, and I know what the deal is. I know how to make them work in rugged environments, but I can tell you there's lots of experimentation going on in self-repairing robots, okay, quote unquote.
Yep.
I can tell you that every one of those tests is constrained in a laboratory, not a real environment. Okay, the term that you need to use is unstructured environment, which means you don't know what the hell's going to happen, right? So suppose you get down there and you find out that the bearings that you chose on those robots don't like the 30 degrees Kelvin temperature at the bottom of those craters, and they start breaking, right? What are you going to do? Well, one thing is that you could start doing tests back on Earth, to find out why it did it. And you're going to discover maybe that your tests back on Earth before you went weren't high fidelity because you didn't have the same material that's in the bottom of the crater. Some form of lunar glass dust that's submicron in size is chewing up your ceramic bearing, and you couldn't have predicted it. So you have to come up with some way to deal with that. So one of the things you bring back is material from the bottom of the crater that's causing your robots to fail. Or you bring spares and the people go in there, bring the robots back to a work shed and fix them. So we still, with our eyes and hands and minds, can outcompete any robot out there. Yeah, we've got things like Watson who can answer questions and stuff like that, in limited fields, play chess, and stuff. It's getting there, okay? AI is getting there, but nobody has built a robot that can repair itself in an unstructured setting yet. Yeah. And that's where the people come in. So the idea is if you get this whole thing going, starting the minimalist train of movement, you're making money. What do? You duplicate the same system. You have more people and more vehicles that transit from Earth orbit to the lunar lander and bring the material back. So it's just like buying more Cessna 172s, right? And at that point, because you're doing effectively industrial engineering, you can ask the question, how many people per robot do I need? And eventually what you'll find is the number of people per robot's number starts to go down, right? Because the reliability of the robots goes up. It's better to not have people up there because they're going to have to be hiding under about 5 meters of rock dust anyways from that galactic cosmic radiation, right? So this is what paves the way for making it cheap to be up there. And at that point, where you want to go as a human will be a lot easier to get to than we can certainly do today.
Yeah.
Right. So, Bill, that was a very interesting answer. So you've given us a snapshot into you want to be one of the guys that really takes the next big leap in searching for life on other planets. Europa, Titan, Enceladus, mining the moon and setting up an international base. So we're gonna start to wrap it up because we know you got to get out of here. But there's one question that I wanted to ask you before we do, and that is, so looking back, say you've passed on and it's a couple of 100 years in the future or whatever. On your gravestone or on your Wikipedia page for say, what would you like it to read? What is the dream adventure, the dream success for Bill Stone?
What is the likely epitaph versus what would be the dream epitaph?
Let's go the dream. Let's go the dream one. We don't want to hear the likely one.
Worked at McDonald's.
The more pragmatic one is he tried hard and fought the system. The dream one would be that we were able to connect with a couple of ultra wealthy people who want to leave a legacy, who want to change the future in a positive way. And we all banded together, and you know what? We did change it. We opened the space frontier by showing that it's possible to go out and extract resources from another world, the moon, okay, and make it a successful business. And why is that? It's not because I'm a capitalist, okay? It's because making a successful thing in space that is a positive return on investment means the creation of an entirely new economy, one that is boundless, one that is not strapped by the limited space of the Earth.
Yeah.
If you look at the cause for wars on Earth, they are largely because of limited space and larger, denser population, okay? And so if you have a escape valve, which is what space is, more and more of us who don't like what we see here will have a place to go on the frontier. And that, to me, would be the legacy I'd love to see.
That's
that we were able to finally open that door.
It's amazing. I really hope, it seems that you're on the right path, and I really hope you find the right person, the Elon Musk or the Jeff Bezos. I know they're obviously in their own fields, but I don't know that many billionaires. I can't rattle off their names. But I hope you find the right person, Bill, because it's just, I don't think there's anything more important in exploration. So, hey, Bill, have you got a couple of minutes to answer 3 questions from me, 3 questions from Tommy before we wrap it up?
All right, keep them short.
All righty. So, your favourite travel destination you've been to on the planet? Favourite destination?
I don't travel. I go on mission-driven projects.
Well,
you can ask my wife.
Favorite cave in the world.
Favorite mission-driven project?
I have to say the dry valleys in Antarctica are phenomenal. It's about as close to being on Mars as you're going to get on Earth.
Awesome. That's a good answer. Okay, second one is your dream travel or mission destination.
Yeah, we'll rephrase them for you.
That's easy. Being one of the crew going to the setup on the South Pole of the Moon.
Beautiful.
Cool. That would be cool.
Awesome. Yeah. Have you got any books that you recommend to people?
Ones that I've written or ones that other people have written?
You can plug your books if you like, or you can like a book that's really positively impacted your life, if any.
Wow. Yeah, it would have been good if you'd given me a day to answer that.
Yeah, sorry. It's the first time. Today's the first time I've thrown that question. I changed. It used to be 3 things you have with you on a desert island, but I changed it at a whim today. So,
Yeah, I mean, people could get on and list books of poetry and stuff like that. I would have to say stuff going back as far as like Gerard O'Neill, talking about space society, the possibility of putting large groups of people in orbit. I would say that's probably some of the more influential. I mean, most of my reading is confined to technical volumes, and so I could recommend technical volumes to you. If anybody is out there that wants to learn technical facts about the moon, I can give you two books. Both, well, actually, there's three of them, but if you look up Paul Spudis, Spudis, Paul has written two very fine books about resources on the moon, and it's very up to date. And it's got some nice history of why NASA isn't going to do it.
Right.
Paul's a very outspoken man. He works within the system, but he's not restrained to say what he really thinks. The other guy would be the last astronaut to leave the moon, Jack Schmidt, Harrison Schmidt, and he wrote a book. I believe it is called "Return to the Moon." And the nice part about that is it's written from the view of a former Apollo astronaut who actually walked on the moon. But it also goes into a lot of the legality of setting up a industrial operation on the moon. Jack has his own views of what you can mine up there to make money with. We have a totally different idea. I'm more aligned with Paul Spudis, and we are, on my side, more aligned with industrial, making it happen rather than talking about the scientific merits or, talking about it in a technical sense.
Cool.
So that's a long-winded answer. Sorry.
No, that's all right. That's good. That'll all be in the show notes for the listeners too, so all the references to books and interesting stuff that we've talked about. So I'll throw over to Tommy. He's got 3 questions, then we'll wrap it up.
Hey, Bill, what's some stuff you like to do in your downtime or when you've got 3 seconds of spare time?
Well, I work out about an hour a day.
Oh, nice.
So most of our expeditions, as far as deep caves go, we've got Olympic class athletes, who are in their 25 to 35 year prime, and I've got to be able to be a productive member of any one of those teams that are going down. And so you got to stay fit. And so I've just made it a part of my life to keep up.
Absolutely.
And I've never regretted an hour I've spent in the gym.
Absolutely.
Just did a 150 kilometer bike run here 2 weeks ago, and it's it's just that's what I do. Now, the other thing is music. I play for 2 bands, and I'm very much into rock guitar and solo leads on guitar.
Awesome.
Do you sing as well?
Yeah, I sing a couple of blues songs.
Oh, cool. We should get together. Or they can.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Cool.
I was like, just got a little bit excited there. Oh, that's got a little bit excited. All right. Big inspirations growing up, Bill. What was maybe give us your best or your biggest inspirational role model?
Oh, well, that was easy. That was the one that led me down the primrose path to higher education, and that was Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin landing on the moon.
Yes.
I know Buzz personally.
Oh, wow.
And to the first time I met him, it was like should I get on my knees?
Yeah.
And the other thing that you find, and I see this all the time with people who have never met before any of the Apollo astronauts or any astronauts, is that you find them looking at their feet. And do you know why?
No.
Because those feet walked on the moon.
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
It's a visceral thing, and I sometimes still find myself doing it, if I'm around him. But those 2 guys, it wasn't just them. Okay, it was the whole NASA mission that made that possible. And I was 14 years old when I saw that, and it was like, I want to do that, and that was it, and once you read what these people did. The fact that Buzz was a PhD, from MIT, I said, that's what I want to do. And so I went on for 12 years of, undergraduate and grad school and got a PhD in engineering and went off and for 9 years applied to the astronaut corps. And, eventually was told that I wasn't the material they wanted because I was too independent.
Wow.
Those guys certainly, and there have been lots of other inspirations. I've met Ed Hillary. Lots of other very fine explorers.
Wow.
And, it's seeing these people and how they live their lives and understanding that, you go after what you dream after as hard as you can, and you don't get bummed out if you don't get there.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's the key from all of these people. So,
Cool.
yeah, that's a couple.
Yeah, definitely. I really like that when you say you don't get bummed out if you don't get there, because it's just the dream and you've got to enjoy the journey itself. Hey, Bill, if you could have 3 people, dead or alive, to dinner, who would they be and why? And obviously your family is allowed to be there, and all those cliche people, they're all allowed to be there.
Dead or alive? Well, most of the ones that I've want to meet that are alive, I've met.
Oh, how good's
That's
that?
pretty lucky.
Yeah, just a little bit lucky.
Yeah, well, I travel a lot, and when you work in the kind of things that we do, you tend to meet a lot of interesting people, and so that's, there might be 1 or 2 that I'd like to have a conversation with. Dead people, wow, there's some truly great ones back there. You'd have to think, like, for example, Oppenheimer, from World War II, the head of the Manhattan Project, the atomic bomb project.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
I came within a hair's breadth of meeting Edward Teller when he was alive, the inventor of the hydrogen bomb.
All right.
And, now you say, well, why do you want to do that? Why do you be interested in making bombs? No, it's just that the guy made a breakthrough intellectually.
It's a scientific breakthrough.
That was so unobvious, and to understand the thought processes behind that is something I'd love to talk to somebody about.
Yeah.
And then you could always go back and say, well, I'd like to. I used to say, well, I'd like to meet some of these original, golden age exploration people like Columbus and, Cortez and Pizarro. But the problem is, the more I read about that era, the more I become put off by these people.
Yeah, they weren't altogether. They weren't altogether great fellows.
No, they were
conquistadors. In fact,
they were not great.
They were the opposite. They were terrible.
They sucked.
They would rank right up there with Hitler today.
Yeah,
100%.
I'm sorry to say that. There's a lot of people around the world who might say, hey, these guys are historical figures. Well, they were pretty brutal historical figures.
Absolutely.
Straight genocide.
But so I would have to change it and say Cook would have been a great one to meet. I would have loved to have met Shackleton.
Oh yeah.
And there is a beautiful study in an individual who is focused yet controlled and understands that the pursuit of a record is not worth the life of you and your team members. Mm-hmm. That's the power of Shackleton. He was within 60 miles of the South Pole and said, you know what, guys, we're not going to make it.
That's awesome.
We got to turn back. And he went back and he wrote it up and he lived, and Scott didn't. And so, there's a lot there. That guy was a fantastic leader. And, I've read all of his books. That's probably, I would probably put him up as the highest that I'd like to meet of all the people who aren't here anymore.
Is that why you named your company Shackleton Mining, or was it because of the Shackleton crater? Which was it, the chicken or the egg?
No. Yeah, there's a lot of people who ask that question. No, it's actually Shackleton Crater, which was named after the man, but the mining company is targeted at that crater. That's what I thought, yeah. That's the highest probability of a place to set up a successful system.
But you probably would have named it Shackleton Mining anyway, even if it was going to the Bill Kerr crater.
Yeah, whatever the name of that crater was would have been the name of the company. In fact, if you went to the north, it would be the Perry crater on the North Pole of the moon.
The Kramer crater.
All right, cool. Well, Bill, is there anything you'd like to plug? So your website where they can find out about your projects, social medias, anything you need to get out there? Now's your time.
There's 2 websites you can look at. One is our company. It's Stone Aerospace, STONEAEROSPACE.com. A lot of stuff on robotics there. If you go to USDCT.org, that's the United States Deep Caving Team, you'll get a lot of information on deep caving expeditions over the years.
Cool. Awesome. All right. Well, thanks a lot for coming on the show, Bill. Like I said, it was
awesome.
One of your TED Talk really struck a chord with me when I watched it a while ago now, and you were one of the first people that I actually wanted to speak to, just because I was so fascinated with what you're doing. So I really appreciate your time. And,
all right.
it was
Excellent.
Great. Cool.
Pleasure talking to you guys.
Thanks, Bill.
Thanks, Bill.
Right.
That's a wrap.
Alrighty, guys, that was our show with Bill Stone. We really hope you enjoyed that one because Bill and I are massive science nerds and would love to get more of that sort of stuff on the show. So if you do it, let us know about it. Just give it a post on Facebook, share the show. What you can do, actually, is you can jump onto iTunes and give us a rate and review. A lot of the guys on there tend to tell us the specific shows they enjoy, and on Instagram as well. So if you like ones like this, we love it as well. Get around us. Bill, who are we sponsored by?
We are sponsored by True Pride. Head to www.truepride.com.au/ADVF. Book a call with the guys there and you'll get a $297 joining fee waived if you decide to go ahead. We're also brought to you by Carve. www.carve.ph/ADVF. Get 10 free hours on any project with Carve if you check them out. Definitely do that, guys. And www.adventurefittravel.com. Use the code word radio if you want 10% discount on all of our trips. Don't forget the show notes at www.adventurefittravel.com/podcast.
Until next week.
And
Speak
until
then.
next week. What a rough exit.
Yeah, well, that was a very rough exit, wasn't it?
See you next week.
Discovery Roger, go for deploy.